So since I still can't make my dumb Q&A work that should finish up the injury series, I'm going to do another tangential video and explain a term that I threw around in the last video and probably have before, because it's a term that I think only I use, because it's part of the charm of being me. And what I'm actually going to discuss is Lyle's but simple approach to exercise nomenclature. Let's get started. So as usual, focusing mostly on weight room stuff, although probably strength power sports, by which I mean, you know, the throws and I suppose sprinting and things of that nature would kind of fall into this category. I'm going to focus on the weight room because I think this is where that terminology really applies the most. And the original set of nomenclature, at least, well, I think the one that's the most common usage was originated by, I want to say Bondarchuk, who was a hammer throwing coach, and if you want some really awful books, try to read his Transfer of Training, which are just a bunch of charts. They're not very good. So, and from memory, he defined 4 types of exercises. The first one was just the competition exercise, and that is exactly what it sounds like. For a thrower, throwing the competition hammer or shot or discus is a competition movement. Powerlifting, squat, bench, deadlift, and strict curl if you're a strict curl person. And for Olympic lifting, full snatching, clean and jerk. Those are the competition movements. The competition. Then there were the two next ones were supplemental and assistance. And you'll see why I use the version that I use, because I get these, I can't ever keep track of which one's which. So I want to say that supplemental movements were variants of the competition movement. So it would be like throwing the hammer with a lighter hammer, or a heavier hammer, a heavier shot or a lighter shot, which is not really as interesting as like in powerlifting. Supplemental movements, again, I think I've got that right, would be stuff like a safety bar squat. It's still a squat movement, but it's different slightly from the competition movement. A deficit deadlift, deadlift from an elevated position, a board bench press or a pin bench press. Again, it's a variant on the competition movement. In Olympic lifting, it would be like a hang clean or a clean from blocks or a snatch from blocks or whatever. Like, again, I think that's supplemental, and you'll see why I say think. That doesn't really apply to endurance type sports, right? There is no running similar activity that's not running. It's running. I mean, I'm sure somebody would go, what about water running, Lyle? And because fuck you, that's why. And then there would be assistance movements, and these would be exercises, again, I think the terminology is right, that are different from the competition movements, but that work weak points. So good mornings for both powerlifters and Olympic lifters, RDLs, things of that nature. And then the fourth grouping would be GPP, general physical preparation, which would be everything else. So, you know, prehab work, hypertrophy type training, you know, sled work, which the West Side Barbell guys did, stuff like that. So those are the 4 categories, I believe, that Bondarchuk originated. Now, I'm going to give you my simplified version because I'm stupid. So with that in mind, I want to give you my but simple 3-category approach to this, and I'll explain why I choose 3, although I kind of referred to it in the last section. So first is the competition movements, right? Powerlifters, squat, bench, deadlift, strict curl, if they're doing a strict curl. Sumi actually did a strict curl. Here she is doing 35 kilos, 77.2 pounds at a body weight of 52 kilos, followed by her happy dance. Set a record and qualified for the Arnold, but we didn't go because she's awesome. Mike, what have you won again? Oh, right, nothing, because you don't know how to fucking tan. Anyway, now, because I'm dumb and old, I have never been able to remember supplemental and assistance as which is which. I might have gotten them right in the last section, I might not have. So, rather than try to remember it, I'm just lazy. Anything that is not the competition movement, but not as in the 3rd category, which I'll explain in a second, I just call assistance work. I don't care what it is. If it's a variant on the competition movement, I call it assistance work. If it's a good morning to increase, you know, make sure my lifter can lock it out if they get tipped, it's an assistance movement. Rack pull, assistance movement. Trap bar deadlift, assistance movement. Also, I have typically not used a lot of competition variants. I tried them once with Sumi, and it did more harm than good because she didn't have the neurological capacity. She would forget how to do the competition movements. So I had her doing pause squats at one point, where you sit in the bottom for 2 seconds before standing up, and she would forget how to turn around her squat. And I took those out very rapidly. And that's, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying lifters that use them are wrong. Clearly some can do that and have no problem. For some reason, I seem to get lifters that can't. And this may, again, reflect who I'm working with, which is frequently newer lifters. And until they really have those locked-in motor patterns on the competition movements, giving them stuff that's similar tends to do more harm than good in my experience. And I'm just all specificity guy. Like, I just don't, for me, I don't know why I would fuck around with a safety squat, bar squat. Also, I've never had access to the bar, so maybe that's why I don't use them. When I can just have the person full squat and fix the weak point with something else. I've never particularly cared for deficit deadlifts because it makes it very difficult to get into a good position in the bottom. Most people don't have the mobility. Again, not saying that people who use them are wrong. I'm not, so don't go misrepresenting me when you decide you want to make people think I'm saying something I'm not. I've just never cared for them. I would rather fix strength off the floor with, as I do with Sumi, with a heavy trap bar deadlift from a dead stop, and just have her deadlift and let it transfer over. And if I want to finish the top, never had blocks, so she just did rack pulls from above the knee. So she would be deadlifting constantly and doing all this assistance work to hopefully transfer over. But anyway, whether it's a competition variant, which I don't typically use, all I'm out with Michelle, she does pause squats to help her learn to get stay tight in the bottom and to get her stronger out of the bottom. Since those didn't work for Sumi, Sumi did heavy deep hack squats. That's how I built her bottom position, believe it or not. And she set records and everything, so it worked. So anyway, I just grouped them together. I'm lazy. I'm too old to figure it out. I've decided that I can't, so I don't bother. It's all assistance work. So that's category 2. And then category 3, I use a term that is, I think, specific to me, at least in this particular subfield. Everything else I call donkey work. And that's the term I actually want to spend more time in this video explaining, because I think it's funny, and I'm going to see if I can make this a thing. If you're in my Facebook group, you've seen me use this term a lot, and probably know what it is, and if you're not, you have no clue what I'm talking about. I mean, you can probably infer that it's kind of the term I'm using that most others would call GPP, General Physical Preparation, but now you're wondering, well, why? Why are you calling it donkey work? And part of it, you can probably guess by the name, like what it kind of represents. Like you can think of what a donkey does, and it's just like this grinding, tedious types of work that has to get done. And that's how I think of all that stuff. And the question then you're wondering is, where does it come from? And I first heard the term when I was incarcerated in Salt Lake City doing ice speed skating. And there's this exercise physiologist named Carl Foster. And I'd read his work before I met him, who for whatever reason just happens to really be obsessed with ice speed skating. And I mean, he's done some classic studies. He was actually, 2 of them were listed in a recent list of like top 100 most influential exercise physiology papers. He did one of the earliest ones on monotony and how it might contribute to overtraining. I don't agree with his conclusions, but that's neither here nor there. The point being that he's a top-notch exercise physiologist. And he was at the Oval one day, and we got to talking about it. Now, to understand what I'm going to say next, I need to bore the shit out of you by explaining the unique and bizarre nature of ice speed skating. When I'm talking about ice speed skating, I'm talking about what's called long track, which is the sport. It's skated on basically a giant ice oval. It's a 400-meter track made out of ice. And it's not to be confused with short track ice speed skating. That's what Apollo Anton Ono did, that's done on a hockey rink. It's a very different sport. This is just about long track. Now, in the earliest days of the sport, by which I mean, say, prior to maybe the 80s, but all through the early 20th century, there were not indoor ovals. And there was not the technology to freeze water to make an oval. The consequences of this being that you had to wait until winter and had to wait for the lake to freeze, at which point you would mark out a track, and that's what you would train and race on. I mean, I'm sure there were out, in some Eastern European countries, there may have been ovals, but certainly in America there wasn't. And the consequence of that was that for this sport, which is insanely technical, skaters only had access to the ice for a very limited period of time, very much depending on where they lived. Now, if you're in one of those frozen tundra Eastern European countries, or God forbid Canada, where it freezes earlier, it was probably a little bit easier. But in the U.S., pretty much if you're not in the Northeast, you're shit out of luck. And that's, I think, a big part of why, as I wrote in that overwritten thing about Olympic lifting on my website, that ice speed skating in this country was really in the Wisconsin-Minnesota basin, which are both frozen tundras. They're god-awful. But that was the only place that it routinely got cold enough that they could mark out a track on and then also lakes that were big enough. So what would happen is that you maybe, if you were lucky, had ice 6 months out of the year. Lucky. And frequently not even that. Well, despite how bad I am at math, the year, I believe, is longer than 6 months, which meant that for 6 months out of the year, ice speed skaters had no ice to train on. Well, what do you do in a sport that is insanely technical and extremely physiologically demanding? Well, you innovate and you get creative. So for about 6 months out of the year, ice speed skaters would have to do all this other shit to try to do something, to develop their aerobic fitness, their anaerobic fitness, whatever technique they could do. Inline skates didn't really get popular till maybe in that sport the late 80s. So you were kind of SOL, and so, ice speed skaters, they did a lot of cycling, and there was a tradition of many of Haydn switched to cycling, and many ice speed skaters switched to track cycling when they retired from the ice, because there's a lot of, but you had to ride the bike to build aerobic fitness, or some would run if they didn't want to ride the bike. I don't know when formal weights really came into the sport. Early on, they did a lot of stuff with like sandbags. Diane Holum's book, which I think I'm one of about 8 people that have ever read a copy of it or even own a copy of it, it has all these movements and just crazy shit, just trying to build strength and endurance in the low position. And then you did what were called imitations, which were these dry land exercises where you got into skate position and tried to mimic what you did on the ice with movements such as low walking and what are called baby steps, where you stand on one leg and then you kick through and step on another one, and all side to side for turns and all this other shit. And you had to do that for 6 months out of the year. And then the ice would freeze, hopefully, and you'd mark out a track, and then you could actually get on the ice and train. That was if you were somewhere cold enough. Now, some people weren't. And also, even at that point, like by the time the late 80s and 90s rolled around, they had a track in Canada and in Europe. Now, as my coach liked to put it, if you could draw on the bank of mommy and daddy, you could go to Europe and train outdoor a lot on the ice a lot earlier. He couldn't do that. To show you how extreme this is, my own coach would train summer outdoors, summer dry land for like 8 months. He would do short track on an ice hockey rink for 6 weeks. He would get 6 weeks on long track, maybe 6 more weeks of short track, and then start over again. So in any given year, he might be getting 18 weeks on the ice in an insanely technical sport. And that was just the nature of the sport. You spent 6 months training like a donkey. See where this is going? Because you didn't have access to the ice. But even when you got onto the ice, there are characteristics, and this is just the nature of speed skating, and maybe I'll do another video on this for anybody who cares, all 3 people, where there are things you cannot develop on the ice. You cannot develop aerobic fitness on the ice because you can't skate that long due to the vagaries of ice. So even in season, you got to ride the bike or run if you run. You may typically dry land drops out at that point. You lift weights has been a traditional part of ice speed skating for the longest time. Eric Haydn, winner of 5 gold medals, one of the greatest skaters ever, was reported to have done 2.5 times body weight for 5 half squats. And one of the craziest stories was he actually squatted 150 pounds for 300 straight repetitions. And the reason he did that is Diane Holum gave him 2 sets of 150 reps, but he had a date. So he just did 300 so he could get done faster. Now, one of my coach's skaters saw this. So this happened. He was ungodly. But that's the nature of the sport. In the summer, traditionally, and we did, when I speed skated, we did 24 weeks of nothing on the ice. We would inline twice, because at that point inlines were good enough to train on them. We would do dry land twice, an hour of these miserable imitations. We'd ride the bike twice, and we would lift weights twice for 24 weeks before we transitioned onto the ice, at which point we'd have 4 ice sessions, 2 bike sessions, 1 aerobic, 1 interval, and 2 weight sessions, typically 1 heavy and 1 power. Let's get back to donkey work. So back to Carl Foster. So at some point, right, so indoor ovals started to become a thing. And you could have compressors to actually freeze water before it got freezing outside. The U.S. had an oval in Butte, Montana, which was outdoors. And my coach told stories of skating, and he'd have icicles in his eyelashes. Lots of fun. For the Calgary Winter Olympics, the U.S. built an outdoor oval. Then many years later, they built the Pettit Center in either Wisconsin or Minnesota, depending on who you talk to, which is this giant drafty warehouse, but it was indoors, and they could freeze it earlier. And then Salt Lake City built their oval, which is the fastest oval ice in the world, except when Canada is, and that's a whole separate video, as the national training center for the U.S. speed skating team. And that's where I was. And it was great. It was climate controlled. It was like 65 degrees, but they could freeze the ice. And that made it so that in premise, ice was available year-round. Salt Lake didn't keep the ice frozen year-round, but they did freeze it earlier than it normally would have, like 3 months into summer. Canada, I believe, did stay frozen year-round, but like even though they could have, they didn't, and I don't remember the reason why, and I may even be wrong about this, but we still did 6 months of dry land. And because I talked to my coach about it, and he said that, yeah, when they first got into ovals, people had tried year-round ice, and they all got burned out and went back to doing off-ice training for a portion of the summer. And I asked him why, and I didn't really like any of his explanations. He said, well, it's probably boredom. Okay, I don't believe that, right? Yeah, ice speed skating, you are skating around on an ice circle, living your life 400 meters at a time, like Dominic Toretto would say. And I'm like, yeah, great. Well, track runners run around a fucking track year-round. Track cyclists, once they got covered ovals, were able to ride year-round. Swimmers stare at the bottom of a goddamn swimming pool 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, and none of them get bored, so I don't buy that. Ice speed skaters are not that special. Only special in the way that you choose to do that fucking sport. So as an explanation, I don't buy that it's a boredom issue. And if it is a boredom issue, well, then you need to quit your sport, because training isn't supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be effective, so get the fuck over it. What I think it was has to do with the nature of ice speed skating, which is that you cannot do low-intensity ice work because of what there's no such thing. You can do easy work in the water. You can do easy work on a velo. You can do easy running on a hard to easy system. You can't do easy work on the ice. But that just tells me that it's a loading parameter problem. If the ice intensity is so much higher, it just means that you need to train less days per week and or take more often breaks. It is not a function of year-round. It is a function of people programming year-round training in a fucked up way. I didn't buy that. Regardless, the ice was available. So, back to Carl Foster. He's in Salt Lake City, and I'm talking shop with him because I'm a big fucking nerd. And this is near the end of my career anyway, so, or my skating. So it wasn't like, I mean, I'm sure I was training that day, but we got to talking. And there had been a general improvement in skating technique and in performances over the past 5 or 10 years. Now, some of that was due to the clap skate, which is a technological thing. Again, a whole separate video. I'm not going to try to explain the physics of that. But when I asked him about it, he said, well, I think a lot of it is that now with more ice available, skaters are spending more time actually skating rather than doing all that donkey work. And that's where I got the phrase. And by that, he meant all that other bullshit that skaters had to do all the time because they either didn't have ice or didn't feel like they could train on the ice that consistently. So all the cycling and dry land and all that crapola that was helping this, I mean, it was helping performance, obviously, but nothing is ever going to help performance as much as doing the competition movement, right? It's a little more complicated. I'm going to do a series on training principles, and I will talk about the specificity issue. But fundamentally, there is nothing you can do that will improve your back squat more than back squatting, for the most part. There's nothing you can do that will make you a better skater that's not skating. But ice speed skaters didn't have that option. And he was of the opinion that the reason skating performances were improving, because at least in a relative amount, skaters were able to put more of their training time into actually skating rather than doing all that goddamn donkey work all the time. So let's put this all together. And that's what I use. I adopted the term from there on out, and I used it with Sumi from the start of her career, which was donkey work was all the shit that wasn't competition work, wasn't assistance work, which again, remember, I used to include anything that's either a competition variant, which I didn't use, or something to fix a weak point. It's everything else, which means, for the most part for her, bodybuilding shit, hypertrophy, because a bigger muscle is a potentially stronger muscle, Jeremy Lenicky notwithstanding, right? So after she would do her competition work, her heavy singles, not maximum singles, like I said in the last video, heavy singles, she would do her assistance work, depending on what day it was and where, you know, different stuff on different days. And then once all the heavy shit was done, she would do donkey work. And that would be generally sets of 8 in whatever movement she was doing for the day. And I cared a lot less about what movements got done than that they got done, because genuinely, it doesn't fucking matter, right? I don't give a fuck by and large what bicep exercise someone does for donkey work, because it doesn't matter. Not for this. I mean, I'm not bodybuilding. I'm not like real sports. Because fundamentally, bodybuilding is nothing but donkey work. I don't really care. It could be based on preference, what fits the person's body. In our cases, many times Sumi's exercise choices were informed by what equipment we had available. So her entire career, all 8 years of it, she did one chest work donkey exercise, and that was cable flies. Proper cable flies, not the way Kasem does it, because it's not meant to be a cable press. That's what we had available. I didn't want her triceps limiting, because she'd already done heavy bench and heavy dumbbell bench or close grips or whatever it was. She did that for 8 years. Trust me, she's got better pecs than any of you. We never did anything else. Back, she did rows twice a week, pull downs once a week, her entire career. Delts, upright rows twice a week, lateral raises once a week. For lower body, we had less equipment available, so she would do a couple higher rep sets of hack squats or leg presses, leg extensions, leg curls, and booty work. All for sets of 8, because she got bored above 8, and I can't count that high consistently, and varying volumes depending on where she was in the year and the training cycle. So basically, I use the term donkey work because I think it's funny, where I think most would use GPP. And here's an example of one of her workouts just to kind of show you how this all gets put together. Right, so we start with squat, warm-ups to 8 singles at 85 to 90%, competition movement. Good morning, 3x3 pyramiding to 1 top set, which was assistance exercise, ass. Then she would go to deadlifts, warm-ups to 6 singles at 85 to 90%, competition movement. Rack pulls, 3x3 pyramiding to 1 top set, again, assistance exercises, ass. Hack squat, 3x3 to 1 top set, assistance movement, and then everything was donkey work. All sets of 8. She'd do hack squats, leg extensions, glute bridge, pull-throughs, leg curl, abs and low back. And that was it. Yes, that's a monster workout, and none of you could survive it. B, it's atypical to put good mornings after squats but before deadlifts, but we did it early in her career, and it never impacted her deadlifts because of the way she deadlifts, which is tragically. Anyway, and then she would do rack pulls once a week, heavy, and then hack squats, again, to build the bottom of her squat position. And then fucking donkey work, which is basically just the hypertrophy shit, along with stuff to make sure that she didn't get hurt with, like I said, a tragic deadlift, which I'm going to show to you now. So here was her 4th attempt deadlift, pulling 177.5 kilos, 391.3 pounds, at a body weight of 113 pounds. I told you it was tragic. Yes, she did deadlift, round back, high-hipped, essentially a stiff-legged deadlift off the floor, but that's what fit her body and what she adapted to. And she never got hurt in 8 years doing it that way. Because A, I used a lot of the donkey work to bulletproof her low back to protect it, but B, I used a very gradual progression over those 8 years. Never using lots of high-intensity, high-frequency work because that breaks people. Aiming for gradual progressions, 2.5 kilos to the bar every 13 weeks. It is an atypical technique, but it's not unheard of. So any of you who want to get in the comments and bitch about it can get fucked. It's essentially what Lamar Gant did, and he also did more than any of y'all put together. Regardless, that was a damn near 3.5 times body weight deadlift to set the RPS state and world age group records, along with the world open deadlift record. And she was 48 when she did it. So tragic or not, it fucking worked. Again, Mike, what have you accomplished in your sport? Oh yeah, fucking nothing. So if you want to play the game of only take advice based on who someone's coached, my athletes have been more successful than you have ever been or ever will be. So maybe you should have let me coach you. I at least would have gotten you to pay for another fucking coat of Protan. Moving on. And her upper body day looked very similar. So bench, she'd do 4 doubles followed by 8 heavier singles. Then she'd do dumbbell, which is competition work. Dumbbell press, 3 sets of 3 to 1 top set. Assistance work, ass, lol. For some reason, she didn't really need a lot of other work for her bench to improve. So it was just donkey work. Sets of 8, cable crossover, V-bar row, upright row, decline nose breakers, which at some points were heavy 5s, easy bar curl, and then a different ab exercise for like 3 fucking sets because abs is boring and stupid. So again, competition, assistance, ass, and then fucking donkey work. So those are my categories because I'm lazy and I'm bored and I see no pedantic reason to separate them, and I think the term donkey work is funny, so I use it with all my lifters, and now maybe you'll use it too. See you next time. Since I keep mentioning her, and I showed you a couple of awesome lifting videos this time, I wanted to announce that my trainee, Sumi Singh, has a new book out titled Becoming a Mentally Tough Motherfucker. How Elite Powerlifting Made Me a Better Person, Parent, and Partner, with both a foreword and epilogue by yours truly, which is a guide to all of the mental training skills she developed over the 8 years of her incredible elite powerlifting career. Topics include goal setting, dealing with resistance, setbacks, failures, journaling, anxiety on the big day if you do compete or have some sort of big demonstration or event, and also what to do when you choke, among many, many, many other things. It's currently available for pre-order at the low price of $7.99 on Amazon.com, and I'll put the link in the notes. If you are in a different country, you will have to go to your specific Amazon and search on her name, which is Sumi Singh, Sumisingh. You will not be able to get it from Amazon.com unless you're in the United States for Amazon reasons, and in some countries you can't pre-order it anyway. You do not have to have a Kindle to get it. You need some sort of Kindle reader, and Amazon does have a cloud Kindle reader to read it on the website. So if you don't have the device, don't worry about it. If you pre-order it now, low price of $7.99, get it before it goes up. It will be sent immediately to you when it is published on August 8th. Buy it now, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell everyone, and maybe consider sending a gift copy to Mike Israetel, because he needs help becoming mentally tough, because he is a weak-minded, excuse-making motherfucker who apparently doesn't know how to get a tan after a decade and a half of competing. Buy Sumi's book. You won't regret it. For the record, I neither read nor respond to comments on YouTube or Instagram, because I don't care. Mind you, I don't delete comments I don't like most of the weak-minded babies in this industry either. If you think my content is great and want to tell me how awesome I am, fantastic. If you think I'm a dumb asshole and want to call me names, also fantastic. I don't care either way, because I have better things to do. If you have questions that you want me to potentially read and or respond to, or most likely ignore, send them to questions@bodyrecomposition.com. Might get to them, might not. It's part of my charm. Oh yeah, I recently added a playlist to my channel. My buddy Solomon Nelson, who does some fantastic videos taking down the cretins in this industry. I've put the link directly to that playlist in the video comments, and you can also find them however you find playlists. He deserves the exposure. Go check him out.